Bugünkü ikinci bizimki sözlüğümüz kızımız Kawsar Yasin. Kawsar bağı. Kızımız Kawsar'nınki bugünkü sözlemek olan temisi yaşlarının Uyghur tədqiqatı, mədəniyyəti ve tili sahəsidəki təşəbbüsləri degan temada buludu. Kızımız Kawsar yakında Harvard Üniversitesi'ni bitirgen hem tarih ve ictimai insanşünaslıq kəsbində fəxri unvanğa erişken. Kawsar'ın Türkiye'deki Uyghur diasporasınınki siyasi ve ictimai faaliyetler doğrusundaki okuş bitiriş makalesi şu mükafatga erişken. Kawsar hanım hazır İnsan Hakları Fondu Cemiyeti'ninki erkin tədqiqatçısı, Uyghur Yaşları Birleşmesi'nin yani United Uyghur Youth'ninki heyet azası ve özü kurguçularının bir bulup kurgan Ravan Uyghur Mentorship yani Ravan Uyghur yetekçiliğininki yetekçisi, kurguçusu. Hani merhamet sözünüzden alayım.
Assalamu alaikum, Hamalaga. My name is Kawsar. I apologize if we're splitting the conversation back into English. My slides are going to be in Uyghurcha, so if you have a harder time following along with me in English, I also have Uyghur on the slides. And thank you so much to Dr. Esed Süleyman Efendim, Dr. Feyzullah Efendim for introducing us and for kicking off the presentation. And just to generally introduce and give background to this presentation, my name is Kawsar, and I was born and raised in the United States. We had brought this up in the previous presentation, but we are now being faced, the diaspora is now being faced with a greater number of children being born and raised in exile, having never even visited or seen East Turkestan, including me. So I was born and raised in the United States. I've never met my family members abroad. I've lived my entire life in Texas. And I would like to give everyone in this conference room a little bit of hope in that even though it is more difficult to be raised in exile, even though it is more difficult that we're living in lands that are not our own, there is still a way in which we can continue to engage with who we are. Just as a heads up, I want to position this conference in light of the recent ethnic unity law in China. The Chinese government approved of the ethnic unity law in March of 2026, and now it is fully in law in July of 2026. And what this means for not just us in the diaspora, but also for those who we have left behind in East Turkestan, that means that Mandarin is now the only language in which instruction and business can formally be conducted. It is, in addition to that, the national identity of China must be a uniform Han Chinese identity. And then additionally, religious practices in schools are completely erased and put in the hands of the Chinese state. Now, what this means and what I encourage everyone in this room to think about today as well is that in light of this law, a Tibetan man self-immolated in front of the United Nations in reaction to this law. And I want all of us to think about his final words, whether or not we believe in his act of self-immolation to be correct or not. He had said in his final words that the root of all of the Tibetan people's problems is that we are under the oppression of the Chinese government and that our lands are no longer our own. And so all of the problems that the Uyghur diaspora faces, all of the problems that we face in Chetan, in America, in Europe, and in Turkey, in regards to preserving our identity, in regards to preserving our culture and our language, lie in the fact that our lands are no longer in our own hands. So what that means and that unique responsibility that places onto us, given all of the statistics that show that we are doomed to fail. In a recent study in 2014 in the United States, they actually did a poll and extensively studied thousands of immigrant communities in the United States. And they found that beginning in the second generation, the mother tongue begins to fade. The third generation already has forgotten how to speak it. And then the fourth one, the language has completely expired. And in the United States, as compared to the rest of the world, is the highest rate of language loss. Japanese Americans in the United States, Chinese Americans in the United States, the longer that they stay here, each generation, they no longer speak their mother tongue. And this is an inevitable future if East Turkestan is not free. And so I pose all of us here, I come in front of you all today to kind of discuss at least what trajectory we can move forward with. I first open this presentation with, I guess, the grim fact that mother tongues in the United States are very, very difficult to keep. and also culture and language and identity is very difficult to keep, considering that our lands are occupied. However, I would say that I feel like that our hope and the continuing caravan of the Uyghur diaspora should continue to survive in each continent and in every country in whatever way we can. And I hope that you all learn from the ways in which us youth or children in the diaspora who have also been born and raised, have never even seen their motherland, are continuing to honor their heritage, are continuing to honoring their roots. And last summer, I was able to spend over a month in Turkey. I conducted over several visits to Turkey and to Europe. So all of this data comes from my personal experiences in the field interviewing with yashlar, with chongla. And in addition to that, I wrote a 150-page thesis last year understanding how the Uyghur diaspora in Turkey, but even, I hope you can apply this even beyond, continue to survive despite increasing Chinese pressure, and in addition to that, a continuing loss of their language. For example, many of us know about the Meshrab heritage in our community. Beginning in as early as the 80s and 90s, the Chinese government began to crack down on Meshrab gatherings. This is simply because of the fact that Meshrab is a very powerful cultural tool in our community. This is where decisions were being made. This is where children were being raised. This is also where we were able to learn many of our important historical heritage, much of our cultural heritage. And because of the fact that Meshrabs slowly but surely began to slowly be raised in East Turkestan, it is now, the onus is on us in the diaspora to continue this tradition. Starting last year, Uyghurs beginning in Switzerland started to host their own meshrab, yashlar. And maybe they didn't follow it through and through to the T, but they continued to place this responsibility. There is a rotation of meshrab gatherings now in Europe. It first started with Switzerland, and then now it's in Sweden recently, where people are performing their cultural music, where yashlar are actually joining and making jokes and also trying to honor their heritage. And then the next country that has this responsibility to host the next largest youth meshrab gathering is Turkey. So I would like to hope that maybe if the responsibility falls on yashlar in the United States, that you can all support us as well. Beyond this as well, in Istanbul, there's an Uyghur youth organization called Rishte. And this is an organization that's largely run by young women just like me. And what they've been doing is it initially started with honoring our Uyghur ziyalilar, our Uyghur intellectuals that are in Turkey. And in our community, intellectuals and those who are students and those in the university hold such a high status in the community. But because of us being in exile, because some of our most renowned historians and people who are very fluent in literature and in our heritage are now in exile and can no longer continue to develop our heritage, develop our intellectual history. And so as a result of that, young women got together in Istanbul to continue to pay homage as well as to reward some of these intellectuals. They would visit house to house to make sure that these people are still okay and that they provide aid to some of their intellectuals. In addition to this, they also take care of elderly women and orphans. And many of these girls have actually told me that even though they have not been able to see their family and relatives and cousins, grandmothers, grandparents in East Turkestan, their continual visits to these intellectuals' homes, to these elderly's homes, to gathering orphans in Turkey, they've been able to create their own family. And I think that that's the responsibility of all of us in this room, that we all are siblings with one another, we are all tuqqan with one another, we're all cousins with one another, because that is how you continue to keep your community very tightly knit. And another thing that I would like to also pub a little bit is that in this gathering today, there will be copies of the Uyghur anthology and as well as Uyghur resistance books sold in the back. And both of these books also continue to touch on the state of the Uyghur diaspora today. Written in both English and Uyghur and Turkish and Chinese and Russian, this speaks to how multilingual and how widespread the community is in the globe. And it ultimately considered us to question, what does it mean to be Uyghur today? And how can we continue to preserve and honor this memory? But beyond this as well, Uyghur Youth Initiative as well as United Uyghur Youth continue to try and honor and walk in the footsteps of those intellectuals that we had just seen in the previous slides. For example, in United Uyghur Youth, we were able to visit Central Asia, the countries of Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, to just simply gather oral histories and archives. This man that you see here, his name is Dr. Ablahat Kahal. and he was unfortunately murdered in his apartment in Tashkent just a week after meeting with us. We had recorded his oral history, and he was able to point us to directions in archives and other materials that we can use. And it is through our visit in Central Asia that we were able to scan hundreds of documents that we are currently working today to try and integrate into a global digital archive. But beyond this as well, for my own thesis project, I was also able to uncover so many more histories. The Uyghur diaspora is very resilient in trying to preserve our history. The Turkistani Library is a library that was just established in May of 2024 in Istanbul. I visited this library multiple times during my thesis research, as collections in Russian and Chinese and Uyghur and Turkish and English, and it even has materials from the Swedish mission press in the 1930s in Kashgar. It even holds many resources that were initially transferred from Mecca and Medina, over 30,000 materials, to Istanbul by a man by the name of Rahmatullah Inayatullah Turkistani. This man, he was able to, across his entire life, collect documents and books and materials in East Turkestan, in Turkey, in Central Asia, and wherever. And so to be able to look through his collections and actually see the times in which he's taken sticky notes and annotated the pages and the books of his works are also ways in which I, as someone who has never stepped foot in East Turkestan, am able to ultimately honor his memory and honor the memory of many Uyghur intellectuals and academics that have come before me. And the works that have been used in this archive and that I was able to uncover in this archive are now in my thesis that has won up to 3 awards from my university. But speaking of universities, I think that it's extremely important that we talk about their role in the Uyghur diaspora and among Uyghur yashlar in the United States. As Dr. Asad Süleyman Efendim had mentioned in his presentation, which really stuck out to me as well, many Uyghur youth and university students living in Germany and elsewhere continue to assert who they are and carry this memory forward, and that's precisely why in the United States and in Turkey we have a unique opportunity to be able to do so. So I am someone who had studied at Harvard University for the last 4 years, and I will continue to be there for my master's degree in the next 2 years. And what this means is very significant, because beginning in 1879, Harvard had hired a Chinese language instructor. The first Chinese student enrolled in that university was in 1881. Today, we hardly can have one Uyghur student present at that institution. And every year, there are 2,000 Chinese students at this university. This is a huge disparity in one of the most important, prestigious intellectual spaces in the United States. Because if there are 2,000 Chinese students organizing their own events, their own meetings, and their own cultural gatherings, where does that leave the other side of the dialogue? How can you have dialogue in one of the most important places in the United States if there is no other Uyghur perspective? And so this is why it is critical, because Harvard University also accepted $93.7 million in donations from the Chinese government. And in addition to that, faculty and students feel the pressure of this money and feel the pressure of the Chinese influence in this university, because they cannot talk about the Uyghur issue. They cannot talk about other specific sensitive issues in the university. And this is precisely why intellectualism, why academia is deeply political. And so as soon as I started Harvard, I organized a protest and I created a student organization. The first protest had over 120 students come, and it was to protest the Urumqi fire that happened in November of 2022. There were students that came from all over, waving flags of Free Tibet, Free East Turkestan, Hong Kong, and it is extremely important to be changing the dialogue in this university, to offer another perspective that this university has once hosted CCP officials and those that have actively denied the Uyghur genocide. As a result, I've been able to also write opinion pieces and actually research my university's ties to the Uyghur genocide directly. So it is through opinion articles and being involved in student journalism that students are also able to question their university's position in the world. Why is it that Harvard continues to host people who actively are involved in genocide? Why is it that there is such a robust Mandarin language program, but we don't have enough resources for Uyghur history and Uyghur language? And so today it's through pressuring the university, because I as a student have the power to do so, that we're able to host an Uyghur history class, that we're able to have an Uyghur language citation. And it's because of that that I was able to make this presentation in Uyghur. And it is also through these initiatives that we preserve our culture and involve the community members outside of the university and into the university's doors. We're inviting the community inside to celebrate Nowruz. We're inviting the community inside to present their perspectives on genocide and the Uyghur issue. And so I hope that as we close out this presentation, and I'm open to questions, that hopefully this has offered all of you all a different perspective on the role of intellectuals, on the role of universities, on the role of students, and also on the role that you have placed onto us now. I hope that you're able to trust us with the responsibility of taking on the cultural preservation of our people, the history of our homeland, and yes, thank you.
Tədqiqatınız əsasında şundaqla şu Avropa, Türkiye, Orta Asiyada nurgun fəaliyyətiniz əsasında naitəliksiniz, naitmi, mənliklə naitmi, məzmunluq oldu. Köp rəhmət. Bunda ise sual başlayılı. O sualını hani sualına tayab olğanlar köpçülükni
Meniki sual emas. Sizge rahmet eytimen. Kevser'ni tunsanlar, alim Ahad'niki aksi Yasin Ahad'niki kızı. Ben neçe yaşadık öğrendim o, 3-4 yaşlar vakti, küçük vakti. Aşağı kalkan şunda peklandım bugün. Dadınızga rahmet, ödük apınızga, siz bize terbiyeliginize. Ben şunda koymak.
Rahmet. Davsa sualla tayavakça.
İngiliz soraydım, Uygurca mı? Uygurca soray, ya. Siz İngiliz sorayasınız buluyor. Köp rahmet sizden naiti, pəxirləndik, hem her zaman pəxirləniniz naiti. Yaxşı xizmət qılatsınız hem tədqiqatınızmı? Şunçilik impressive. Benim sualım hem de hazırqımı şu bütün konferansın temisi. Biz qandaq qılıb yaşlar bilen biz hem de hazır çoğunluğa qatarı kirib qaldıq. Aramızdaki şu hemkarlıqni, bir-birimizni qo'llab, bir-birimiz bilan birlikda xizmat qilishni qanday qilib yaxshi davom qilamiz? Chunki bu two-way street bo'lishi kerak-ku. Endi biz cho'nglarlarni yoshlarga reach out qilib, yoshlar bizni har zaman write off qilib sizlarni muhim emaslar bilan karimiz yo'q desa to'g'ri bo'lmaydi. Men bir misolni bersam, o'tgan oyda Azov Freedom Forum bo'ldi. Bir munchalar yoshlarimiz bor, va xush bo'ldik. Biz Uyg'ur harakati tashkilotidan şu siz sözleyen etnik unity'lar, anandikin Uygurlarning bugün beşiği kilovatkan şu irqiy qirg'inchilik ve Uyghur forced labor to'g'risida bir cho'ng bir breakfast site event qildik. Biz hamma yoshlarga birdan reach out qildik. Kelinglar deb taklif qilib, ammo nayt echinishli holda 40 dan ortiq shunday bir zalda yoshlardan Tibetlik yaşlar geldi, Hong Konglik yaşlar geldi, hatta Sadırın Mongoliyalık yaşlar, dünyanın her yerden gelen Amerika'dan ya başka yerden. Uyghur yaşlardan birisini gelmedi. Also some of them were register kıldı, kelimiz dedi, Mahliya bizden yaş kızımız emsik reçat kıldı. Gerçi hiç kandak çıkınca takaşmakan olsun hiç kim gelmedi. Hem de bu bir misali yani yakınki. Onun aldığı mı bu Amerika'da mı bu işini biz cık görevatımız için. Biz yaşlar reçat kılımız, biz yaşlarını include kılımız. Ama ne için yaşlar? Bizni include qilmaydi, bizning faoliyatlarimizga to'liq qatnashmaydi. Bunun da bizda bundan endi mas'uliyat bizda bo'lishi mumkin, research responsibility from our side, but qanday qilib shuni biz texmi yaxshi qilamiz, qanday qilib sizlar bilan birlikda hamkorlashib va qo'limizdagi kuch olab jugagan nimani biz berishimizga bir imkoniyat bo'ladi. Rahmat.
Rahmat.
You bring up a good point. This also speaks to a broader generational divide. There is a general misunderstanding between, of course, younger generations, older generations. And as someone who was born and raised in the United States, I don't even understand some of the jokes that the Chongla say. So it is also very difficult to be able to speak across the aisle and do a two-way street. So I completely understand. And this is another failure, I believe, on just the broader Uyghur community in general, because you have Tibetan youth, you have Hong Kong youth, Tibetan youth even among them, there's those who are half Chinese, half white. and the other parent is Tibetan, but they continue to be the most active in the Tibetan cause, even if they're only half Tibetan. And so this is another thing that our diaspora in the United States and across the world needs to also be able to be more accommodating of, is that we are now being faced with a different set of problems, the youth. Some of us may be born mixed, some of us may not be able to speak our mother tongue anymore. Some of us may not be able to understand as much of Uyghur culture anymore. And so what does this mean now for the future of our diaspora? What do we do with these children? And I think that it is a two-way street, right? Some of these children, they may respond this way because the Chongla may not have been as open to them. And another thing in which youth are also trying to do is just create separate ways in which they feel the most comfortable. Many youth just prefer to be in separate spaces because they're most comfortable with one another. They're able to understand that, oh, like speaking Uyghur is too exhausting, we may just have to do this in English. And as a result, some people do other kinds of meetings, their own programming in English in whatever form they're comfortable with. But at the end of the day, this is still super important because at the end of the day, you need to be able to continue to provide for those who may not be as connected to the Uyghur community. You need to be able to gradually reach out to these people. And so I think another example in which I like to think about as a good collaboration maybe between the Chongla and the Yashla is that it was through Uyghur Academy that me and Zlala and Iltikin and a lot of my friends were able to begin a separate but also very interconnected organization called Rawan Mentorship, where we looked at what the efforts of Uyghur Academy were in the past, how do we cater them to the needs of the community, of the youth community today. And at the end of the day, we continue to be in collaboration with Uyghur Academy. We continue to work with Totem Network. And there's an ease of communication between as many of these, I guess, Chongla Teshkilatla, Yashla Teshkilatla, right? So if you would like to be able to, I guess, this is the most ideal way in which we can continue to collaborate, I believe. Rawan Mentorship addresses the needs of a lot of Yashla who maybe seek to apply to universities like Harvard, but at the end of the day, we continue to be in meetings with Rishte and other people here about what are more broader goals that we need to be addressing for the Uyghur community, and how can we train future youth. And another thing too is that those that participate in Uyghur Academy things are also participating in Rawan Mentorship things. And hopefully this can be applying to as many sectors beyond just education. I really truly hope that with advocacy and other avenues, we can also continue to be this interconnected and hopefully this more unified.
Rahmat. Yani bir sual bolsa boladı. Vaktimiz kiçikkina бар. Eğer başka sualım olsa, hakkını.
Assalamu alaikum. Sanamız, Kawsar sanamızga rahmet eylemen. Allah razı olsun. Meniki Roshan Abbas hanımınki soğan suala qarta üzün oyluğunun ba. Yani ortaklaşkım geldi yani. Yani hemimiz müstemleke bir devletninki Kurasi hesapta Şarkı Türkistan halkı. Hemimizin arzusu inşallah kelgüsüde prezidentlerimiz biz şu günü kürenmegen takdirde mi prezidentlerimiz olsun bir hür erkin bir vatanımız Şarkı Türkistan'da yaşayalasa inşallah kelgüsüdeki şu evlatlarımız bizden keynimizden belki beddua kılmasın yaxşı gaplarımızı qilib, yaxşı tarixlarımızı sözlep ötüp gitem degan şu arzu hevesler hemimiz bir yerga yig'ilib to'plashib o'ltiribdik. Endi hozir Roshan Abbas xonim yani dedi Chongla bilan yoshlarning o'rtasida bir hang bor. Bizni yoshlar qo'llamaydi deb. To'g'ri hozir shu Chongla qirib asta-astagina sahnadan tushsa, buning o'rniga chiqadigan, bosadigan odam yo'qdek. Shu taraf qarab ketyapti bu ishlar. Endi bu jarayonlarni men yani kitaplardan ko'rdim, yanındaki boshqalarnikidan angladim. Endi shu Asad Süleyman ustozning so'zlarini ichidan masalan chiqadi ko'pincha. Biz bu davlatni qurishda siyosatga, yanından keyin har xil faoliyatlarga tayinimiz. To'g'ri qo'limizdan keladigan shu. Buning albatta tayinish kerak, bu ishlarni o'zini yani qo'ldan kelishcha eng kuchab qilish kerak, ammo shu davlatni qurish uchun siyosatga tutish qilishdan, yanından keyin shu davlatga munosabatlik masalan moddiy jihatdan har ishlarga tutish qilishdan ilgari shu davlatning asosini tiklaydigan madaniyatga bakroq kuchsak, shu medeniyet insanın engide şekillengen vakitte, her birimizin içki dünyasında, ang seviyelerimizde şekillengen vakitte, Biz meyli dünyanın qanday tarafida tug'ilishdan qat'iy nazar, ya'ni shu vatanga bog'liq, vatandagi shu yerda yashagan xalqlar va shundoq ham chet elda faoliyat qilayotgan shu cho'nglarga hammamiz, ya'ni yoshlarmi shularga bog'lanib yashaydi ekan deb, ya'ni shunday tushunaman. Nima uchun desa, madaniyat degan gapni o'zida sizlar bizlarniki o'y, fikr, xiyollarimizni, paranglashlarimizni, chaqchaqlarimizni, jamoat sorunlarimizni, hatta iqtisodiy, ijtimoiy hamma munosabat, ya'ni siyosiy munosabatlik bütün ishlarning hammani o'z ichiga oladi hisobda. Endi shu bolalarimizni agar oila ichida shu madaniyat his tuyg'usi bilan tarbiyalab cho'ng qila olsak, shu bolalarning biri oilada ota-onasiga tutashganlik uchun sirtlarga chiqqan vaqtimda shu faoliyatlarning o'zida shunda oldiga chiqqan peshqadamlarning o'zida qo'llaydigan holatlar o'zi shakllanadi. Masalan, shu singlimizmi? Endi ona desam ko'ngli kelmasin, biz Uyg'urlarga, Uyg'ur millatining kimligini saqlash uchun leksiya beryapmiz, lekin İngilizce leksiya. Aslında bu leksiya Uyg'urcha berilishi kerak. Chunki bu yerda hamma odam Uyg'ur. Shundan birga Uyg'ur kimligini qo'g'dash uchun bir leksiya berish uchun qanaqa qilish kerak? Uyg'urcha so'zlab turib leksiya bergan bo'lsa biz texnik suyunatdik. Albatta hozir biz suyundik. Xizmatingizdan Alloh rozi bo'lsin. Biz xursand bo'ldik, mamnun bo'ldik, ammo yana mushundaq kamchilik, yetersizliklarni o'ziga nisbatan davomli ko'z yumib mingaversak, bu shu oxirgi kelgan chig'izda hammamizning beshimizga vobal bo'ladi. Cho'nglar ketsa, kichiklar o'rniga chiqmaydi. Shunga shunda bir til meselelerini o'zida, mesela başka milletlerin tilini tadqiq qiladiganlarmi, başka milletlerin tarixini tadqiq qiladigan mesela Amerikaliklarmi bizning tilni o'rganib Uyg'urchada so'zlab turib tadqiq qildi ekan normalda. Shunda madaniyatga munosabatli bo'lsa, ana tilimizga munosabatli, o'zimizning madaniyat yashaydigan ishlarimizni oiladan boshlasak har birimiz inshaalloh kelgusida cho'nglar bilan yoshlarni o'tirish bog'ini deb o'ylayman. Rahmat. Vaqtni qo'ying.
Rahmat. Vaqt munosabati bilan shay to'xtaylik. Kevser to'g'riliq men ikki qiz bir gap qo'yayman. Kevser o'zi Harvardga o'tgan vaqtida, Harvardga o'qishga kirgan vaqtida Uyg'urchani asosan so'zlayolmaydi. Ammo Kevser 4 yillik o'qish jarayonida Uyg'urcha nihoyat zo'r ilgariladi. Shunga aytdim, bizning degan ham butun Uyg'urchamizni tushunib turdi, javobni ingliz berdi. Biz bugungi shu yig'inda agar ingliz so'zlasa Uyg'urcha material tayyorlaydigan, agar Uyg'ur so'zlasa ingliz material tayyorlaydiganni tashabbus qilgan yaşlarımızga azraq bir fırsat bereyli deb. Şuna endi Kevser bundan keyin çoqum men davomli tirishib Uyg'urcha o'rganib deb o'ylayman. O'tirasiyalar berib, Uyg'ur yoshlar bilan, Uyg'urlar bilan, cho'ng Uyg'urlar bilan, endi yashangan Uyg'urlar bilan o'tirasiyat ko'rishganimi, shu o'ziningki madaniyatini, o'zining kimligini tepishdiki muhim bir qadamlar deb o'ylayman.